Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the Chief Development Officer of Empower Brands, Scott Sutton. Scott, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Frank. I am excited to be having another conversation with you, my friend. Looking forward to the dialogue.
I am looking forward to. So Scott and I are new friends. We met in New Orleans at the Emerging Franchise Conference back in November 2023. And we had the opportunity to co-host together I think the topic was really on how to build your company from the ground up, how to grow to your first 25 units. And I thought we had a blast.
It was great. You and I talked about it with the crew that showed up last day of the conference. I think it was 9:00 in the morning in New Orleans. And we kept thinking to ourselves, well, are we going to have a few people in the room or not? The room was packed. We had an incredible showing of folks that were really trying to learn about how you get from no franchisees, a few franchisees, up to that 25 milestone and beyond. And some really good feedback from those that attended, Frank. I thought our time together was just incredible. And what energy from that group and from the IFA. They just put on a really great show.
They did. So you're right. We had standing room only. I saw some people actually in the doorway, no other place to stand. So what I thought we would do today, I'm so excited to have you on the show, is I thought we would let's kind of recreate that since so many people weren't at the Emerging Franchise Conference. And well, after all, that's kind of the theme of the show since we have so many founders that are emerging. So I thought we would start out kind of getting into how to grow your franchise, how to get those first 25 units. And I thought you and I could kind of riff back and forth since we're coming at it from two different ways and there's no one way to skin this cat. I'd love to hear your insight. You know, I'm a new founder. I've got a concept. I've hopefully have a company-owned location or two that I've already established some cash flow. What are some of the highlights of some of the things I need to do, Scott?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. You talk about the founders that were in the room with us in New Orleans at the EFC, and your days, Frank, as being a founder of establishing a brand that became a leader, right? And still today is a leader. It starts with a mentality, and especially for founders, franchising is a separate business. It is not operated in the same way, and in many cases thought about the same way as the underlying business that's being franchised. That's a mind shift. It's a cultural shift and thinking through how now do I need to operate? What are the disciplines I need to bring to the table to be able to run and grow a franchising business? Again, there's a distinction there. And I thought you had some really great feedback when we last spoke about that mind shift from your perspective. But first things first, right? When you think about growing, when you think about what do I need to do to get those franchisees into my business, it starts with shifting your mentality away from, I'm in the youth sports business. I'm in the early childhood education business. You're in the franchising business. Mm-hmm. And there are some fundamentals that go along with that are just really, really important. I mean, you went through that shift. And I think your story is incredible in helping folks understand how to get from, I'm in this business, now I'm franchising. How do I need to think differently about the business of franchising?
Well, you get punched between the eyes as a founder is what happens, because when you first franchise, you find out incredibly quickly of the real business you're in. Before I did the podcast, I'd done a lot of research on franchising, in particular on the growth and the lack thereof of franchisors. And the one stat that always kind of like, it kind of drove me crazy before I did the podcast was this stat that we've heard that whether it's 250 or as many as 400 franchisors maybe begin to franchise, and as that many come off franchising, and that big number of 4,000 franchisors never grows. So before I started the podcast, I was like, I got upset and I got frustrated. Like, why is this? But I came to realize that for the most part, the primary reason is that people did not make that shift, right? That's one of the primary reasons why somebody doesn't make it in franchising is they don't shift it, that they think they're still in the pizza business, or they still think in the commercial cleaning business, and they're not in the business of making people successful.
Yeah. And for me, like I think about, and this is an example that I love to use, and it's a family example. So my grandfather was an independent waterman on the Chesapeake Bay. So he harvested blue crab, he harvested clams and oysters, and he built from one vessel, one commercial vessel up to 7. He built a great business. That's how he provided for my mom's family as she was growing up. And he always had leftover blue crab. So whenever I went to see them, my grandmother would make crab cakes, and just phenomenal crab cakes. But here's what I noticed as a young person. I noticed that when she was making blue crab, there was no recipe. And that's kind of nostalgic, right? Oh, my grandmother made great chocolate chip cookies, and she just got out the flour and she did this. And that was my grandmother with crab cakes. And I'll never forget my mom finally like following grandma around the kitchen and looking over her shoulder and figuring out what the measurements were so that she could build a recipe that could then be replicated. And God bless my grandmother, she's passed now, but we have a recipe. And every time I make that recipe, who do I think about? I think about my grandmother. The point is, I give you that story because I think in a lot of ways, independent small business owners know what they have to get done to care for their customer in the moment, day to day. They've got it in their head. It's very tribal. It's very experiential. But franchising is a recipe of taking the underlying business and teaching very programmatically, very consistently, how to onboard, train, site locate, market, coach, mentor, and at times, govern folks in the operation of that business. And those disciplines, if you really think about it, are just inherently different, right? And use my grandmother's example, right? What was she focused on? She was focused on delivering a product, putting it on a plate so that the family could enjoy a really great crab cake, right? But she wasn't thinking about how would I teach that to someone else in a way that if I taught it to a third person, it'd be all very consistent. How would I tell people about this product in the way of marketing? How would I coach someone to grow that business, to be able to scale it to more customers? Those are the things and the disciplines that I think are absolutely mission critical. Number one, for growth. Number two, for consistency and for brand consistency across the markets and states and countries where a service or a product will be offered. And to me, those are the key disciplines that are foundational that franchisors need to start with, even ahead of, okay, well, now I need to go get my first 25 franchisees. Well, let's make sure we've got a system in place to help support each of their onboarding, their training, their site location, their pre-launch marketing, their post-launch marketing, their coaching, their governance. I know that you went through some of those things, Frank. What was the most important learning as you bridged into being a business owner to also being a franchisor? What was the thing that stands out, the biggest learning, the biggest aha moment for you?
The biggest aha moment was that these franchisees had never owned a business before, and I was actually teaching them. I was doing more business coaching. I thought I was teaching them the business of running a sports league, but what I didn't realize is that we were also going to be teaching our franchise owners simple accounting. What should the chart of accounts look like from their financials? We talked about growing, talked about scaling, about how to recruit, who you need to recruit, like all of these things. It was more about how to be a real business owner. And the other big part was I don't think we understood, Scott, early on, the value of how much emphasis we had to put on teaching them how to scale. It's very easy to teach somebody how to run a business, but in our business, like in a lot of Empower brands, right, it's territory based, and you have the only way you're going to grow is by scaling, having multiple locations or be able to service many customers. And in our case, we had to get our franchisees away from the owner operated model to, look, having one venue location where all of, say, your league play is going to be is not going to get the job done. You need to open 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different places of playing. And you obviously can't be in more than one place at a time. So teaching scale and getting people away from a small mindset of nobody could do it like me was a huge transition. I did not expect it to be a challenge, but I didn't realize how many people bought the business thinking it was about them, and they didn't think they could ever hire anybody as good as them.
You struck a chord when you use those two words, like me, from the perspective, and look, inside of Empower Brands, we've got a mix in the portfolio, 11 brands segmented into 3 different cohorts: emerging brands, growth brands, and mature brands. And the growth and mature brands, it's the like me concept is interesting and a little different because we understand and have a knowledge of who are the top performing franchise owners in that particular brand. Now I'm going to go back to my word recipe, right? Now we understand who might be the best fit to add into that franchisee cohort for future growth. And that's that like me mentality. What's the persona? What are the attributes of that top performing franchise owner? How do I make sure I'm marketing to and attracting those similar candidates that can help my business scale and grow with the right people, right, in the right markets? But what if you don't have any franchise owners? Right. I think to some degree, a founder, right, someone that has built the business, that has that fire in the belly, that has figured it out, that understands the nuances of the category and understands how to deliver to the customer, they're looking for that like me individual. I'm curious, Frank, I think when you and I spoke previously, you were talking about, my expectation was that franchise owners coming in, they were going to want to be like me. They were going to want to scale and maximize the potential of the territories in which they were operating and to really serve a lot of customers. If you look back on those first 5, 10 franchise owners that come in, do you feel like, number one, do you feel like that you were looking at it from a like me perspective? And did it turn out that they were like you?
That's right. They were not like me. I thought, because I have nothing to go on, right? So I have no avatar set because I really don't know when I'm a new franchisor what I'm looking for, but I know, well, I'm the one who ran the business. So I assume it's going to be people like me. And as you could probably imagine, because as a new concept, you get people that are risk takers, right? You're not going to get somebody that's going to expect all the systems and processes in place starting out. They're going to be a little more, they're going to be not just be a risk taker, but they think that they're going to have more of a voice, and they did, right? But you're right, as it turns out, they were people that end up not necessarily being like me. The mistake I made is that I assumed I needed people that liked sports, that knew something about sports. But I've mentioned this on the podcast a few times where that ended up being sort of the Achilles heel to our business, because when if you know a little too much about something, say sports, and you have this preconceived notions on what you think the business is, and then you're focusing on the minutia of sports. So for example, in my business, let's say it's flag football. If I get a former college football player who, he blew out his knee, otherwise he would have been in the NFL, blah, blah, blah. And he comes in and says, well, I don't know why in the rules of flag football, 1 foot in bounds is a complete catch. It should be 2 feet in bounds is a complete catch. Like, who even cares what the hell that rule is, right? This has nothing to do with the success of your business. So it wasn't until we had a franchisee in South Florida who came on board, and he came right out and said, look, I love kids. I like sports. I don't know much about sports, but I'm a business guy. And we took a flyer on him, and it was like the light bulb went on, because he was successful quickly, so much so that we started highlighting him. He was like the spotlight at our national meeting. And we wanted to highlight him because we were showing to all the franchisees that it's not about the business. It's not about sports. It's about the business of sports. And he was very, very upfront about what he didn't know, but his business acumen was spot on.
I love this. This is like trailing into the E-myth, right? And we talk about the manager and the technician. And can you do both? Do we want people to do both? That, and you're using that example of the athletic bent, that focus, that feels like more of a technician
Totally.
approach to the business, as opposed to someone that can manage. I think, one of the learnings that I've always held true, and it really does show if you look at it, which is process and really taking the time to define. Let's talk about a franchise sales process. And the academics would say an opportunity management process, right? With your stages and your exit criteria and the things that you have to have in place to make sure you're bringing people through the process consistently. But there's an evaluation part of that. If you're able to spend the time and build a sales process that is right for you, an evaluation process that's right for your brand, the process itself will tell you a lot about the candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Does that candidate follow a process? Does that candidate feel like elements of the process shouldn't apply to them? That maybe we should do things differently or accommodate them differently based on who they are or where they are or what their interests are. That's telling. That starts to get to, all right, if you're not willing to follow a process as a candidate, then what are my expectations as you become a franchise owner?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to follow my process? Are you going to follow the recipe as it relates to building, growing, sustaining, scaling your business in that territory? Or are you just going to pick and choose which areas you think are going to be impactful, important, or not? That little piece of the evaluation process can in and of itself shed light on how that individual might act as a franchise owner, even sometimes more so than anything else. So I think really making sure that there's a clear path, a defined process, and holding those candidates accountable to that will help make sure that you're at least getting folks in the brand that are willing to trust the franchisor, to follow a process and not stray from that as they begin business operations.
Right. And if there's a new founder that's just getting ready to launch their franchise, they're probably saying, okay, Scott, that's all great, but how do I find my first franchisees? Doesn't that lead to why it's so important to start with your company-owned location? Not for just proof of concept, but how often have we heard, I found my first franchisees, they were either friends of family, or they were customers, right? That's the easiest way to getting our first franchisees, is they're often customers and referrals.
There's no doubt about it. We have 2 new brands in the portfolio. And when I say new brands, these are new to industry franchise concepts that were born out of non-franchise businesses. So Bumble Roofing is a great example. And then Canopy Lawn Care. We've got a really diversified portfolio. And so, for example, our roofing brand is in a unprofessionalized, non-recurring, non-discretionary, high-ticket category where that founder, David Baton, has brought technology, customer-centric focus, and professionalism to a business that traditionally hasn't had those things. So he's got some differentiators. Canopy Lawn Care is a recurring, lower ticket, needed, not so discretionary spend item as well at the home services level, also with tech, right? Also with differentiation. So these are 2 brands that have had great success as non-franchise businesses. And now the next step naturally is to begin franchising. And here there's this marketing concept that's known as frequency illusion. And it was coined years ago, and it kind of describes how we as consumers, once we experience a brand or engage with a brand or somehow become connected with a brand, we will start to see it more often in the wild. Folks that have had a Canopy Lawn Care service, all of a sudden they start to notice the Canopy Lawn Care vans, right? Riding around. And if you notice that your neighbor was receiving a service from Bumble Roofing, all of a sudden you start to notice that Bumble Roofing truck that's rolling around the neighborhood. So these kinds of advantages from an existing brand awareness marketing penetration perspective are really, really important. And what we're finding is, in the case of David Baton and then Hunt Davis, who founded Canopy Lawn Care, they're able to show a prospective franchise owner what the brand looks like as an alive, living, breathing, succeeding business. in the marketplace. And setting aside the item 19, that is the historical performance from a financial perspective of those businesses, being able to see, feel, touch, experience, and understand the businesses, we have found that those operating, call them corporate enterprises or locations, are really important in helping to further shape and share what the differentiators are with brands.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the number of company-owned locations before somebody franchises? Are you looking for somebody that has developed some scale? Now, it could be territory-based, but is there some sort of magic number or some sort of measurable data point that you look for that you feel like somebody has established themselves enough before they franchise?
Yeah, I'll say it too. Like there's two key things, right? There's time when we think about proof of concept, time and then territory scale. And when we say territory scale, that's more about penetration. So is that business replicable in standard systematized territories throughout major markets in the United States? And from we also look at brands that skew to the premium side of the categories as well, either from a differentiation perspective or technology perspective or both. But for us, when we look at a particular brand, we want to know that, of course, we want to have some sense that there is a strong proof of concept there. But ultimately, over time, can that business scale and support a franchisee's investment in a given market across the United States? From a number of corporate locations perspective, I believe if you're going to have a corporate location, you should have one, right? And in many cases, you may have that founding location. So, for example, Bumble has a location in Los Angeles, California, Canopy in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. Our strategy isn't to grow those corporately run businesses. At some point, you have to make a decision. Am I the developer and growth engine of corporate units, or am I a franchisor? And what is your core? What's going to be your core focus? And that's where you need to spend your time and your effort. There may be a point, and I don't think this is a bad thing at all, there may be a point where your growth dictates and your core focus dictates that former corporate location maybe needs to be refranchised.
Sure.
It might need to be sold to a franchise owner so that you now can focus all of your time on onboarding, training, marketing, support, mentorship, all of the disciplines that will help each franchise owner grow. I think having corporate locations certainly can be a benefit early on, but people need to be really careful about the distraction factor and the core focus of franchising later on after launch.
I totally agree with you. I think franchising is difficult enough. How can you possibly spread yourself out that you can have your team focused on the franchise support, training, ongoing support, technology, operations, management, marketing, finance, all those things, and still have company-owned locations? Yes, there are brands that have successfully done it. But when you're talking about a large brand like, I don't know, McDonald's, if I go to the extreme, yes, they have the resources to do it. But somebody like me that's franchising my concept, I think you should absolutely have a company owned location or two or three. But I agree. I think you have to decide, are you in or are you out? Are you franchising or are you a corporate owned strategy?
And if I'm a candidate, and I believe that there are a number of candidates out there and probably most, right, that want to understand, I get the question a lot on management calls, but what's the strategy, right? Okay, this is very interesting. Empower's got a number of brands in the portfolio. The brands are successful. They're growing. That's great. But what's the strategy? What's the next? Where are you spending your time? What is your core focus? And it gets blurry, right? It starts to get blurry if you have this corporately run engine that's growing. It starts to beg the question, where are the dollars being spent? Where is the talent that's coming in, spending their time? What are the initiatives tracking to? Is it franchising? Is it corporately run locations? So I think, to your point, I also think about the benefit of having, I'll use the term from a food perspective, right? But having a test kitchen, having a corporate location that you can test and you can do A/B testing. You can run some I2M, innovation to market exercises to test new approaches, new products, new services, new technologies, and determine whether or not those new additions, that innovation is going to fail or succeed. And if it fails, then you move to the next idea on the list inside of your test kitchen, and whatever initiatives are successful, that gives you a proven opportunity to roll that out to your franchise system instead of having to use the franchise system and a small cohort of franchisees to run that test kitchen process. So there are very, very good aspects of having a corporately run location. But when you think about scaling, going from 3 to 5 to 10 to 20, it just gets to me really blurry from a strategic perspective when we all know candidates coming in that are in many cases investing their life savings. They are giving up a career to achieve that dream of business ownership. They want to know that franchisor is behind them, focused on them, building the strategies that are going to help them grow and be successful. It's hard to do that when you're 50, 40, 80% of your time might be spent in non-franchised activities in that business.
Oh, we are in total alignment for this foundation of building this franchise company, right? So the next thing is, again, I'm a franchisor. I need to start selling franchises. Let's take the next step and talk about, do I use brokers? Do I not use brokers? Do I use a franchise sales organization, or do I sell franchises in-house? So let's start with the brokers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and those are the three legs of the stool. The consultants out there and the organization that exists, and brokers, consultants, advisors, absolutely a valid and effective path at growing the franchise organization. And I will tell you, from a cost perspective, it is costly, right? There are commissions that are paid to consultants for the work that they do in delivering candidates that ultimately do a deal, right? So one of the benefits of the consultant organizations is you're not paying money up front per se. Now, many of the consultant organizations have a membership fee. They may also require the attendance at an event such as an annual conference. That certainly is upfront capital. But on an ongoing basis, you are paying a success fee, meaning you're paying a fee when that franchise owner signs a franchise agreement and joins the system, right? The other big advantage of the consultant organization is the additional layer of what I'll call qualification. Franchise consultants spend a lot of time with individuals who have an interest in business ownership. Maybe it's a passion, maybe it's a dream or a goal, but they're spending time vetting and aligning candidates with brands that seem to fit with the interest levers of those candidates, right? Some candidates don't want to be in a brand that might be outdoors or focused on outdoors. That's good to know. And so consultants work very hard to make sure that they understand the candidate, what the candidate's interested in, what they're passionate about, what their level of investment looks like, and then they match them up with brands where there may be a good fit with that candidate. So when you get a referred lead from a consultant, from a broker, from an advisor, from a coach, there's already been a great deal of vetting that's taken place. And there's value to that. There's real value to that. That's why the close rate of consultant referred deals is probably 5x what it is on organically non-broker referred or driven deals. So there's certainly value. You'll hear franchisors say that it's costly on the consultant side. Consultants earn their commissions for sure, but it is absolutely a great way to get the brand awareness out into the marketplace, as well as to get qualified leads coming into the pipeline for potential new franchisee awards.
Sure. My take on it, anybody that says it's expensive, is basically saying, I need to sell franchises to keep the lights on, right? And your franchise sales, should not be part of the revenue that we're trying to keep the lights on. I did that, unfortunately. I had no choice. But it's only expensive if it doesn't work, right? I think anything in life, you could say something's cheap or is expensive. Depends on what are you getting in return. When I used the broker networks or consultants or advisors, whatever you want to call them, I had very mixed results. I think partially was due to my concept. It wasn't very simple. It was hard to explain exactly what we did. I take responsibility for that. We did put the time in, we did put the money in. Maybe it was difficult because we were first to market with our business, so there was nothing else to compare us to. Maybe that was part of it too. But what I'd love to get your take is, if I am a founder that is considering using the broker networks, what are some of the things that I can put my best foot forward so that I do have success with the brokers?
Well, the first things first, you nailed it. And that is education of the consultants. And I mean, let's face it, for folks that are listening and watching, I hope they understand the degree to which Frank Fiume is a trailblazer, right? Well, you created a category in a lot of instances inside the franchise sector relative to the work that I9 was doing and is doing. The downside to that is, to your point, consultants may not understand that offering. They may not understand the business because there may not have been a business in that category that they've worked with in the past. So, and I give you an example. I'll go back to Bumble Roofing, right? There are other franchisors in the roofing category that have launched before Roofing launched. They've been in business for a number of years. So the consultant organizations understand the roofing category.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to educate them about the market size, the consumer preference, the typical channels of revenue, how you market. The consultant organizations get it, right? And many consultants have already placed candidates into roofing businesses. So they understand that it's a viable category and one that their candidates are having success operating within. So if you don't or aren't in as a franchisor a category that's well known, if there isn't already a degree of competitive intelligence amongst the consultants, you're going to have to educate them about the market, the model, the management, and the motivation. Right. Those are my 5M method, Frank. I'm sorry. And I gave you four, right? Four of the 5Ms, but that's what market do you play,
Mm-hmm.
right? How does your model help the franchise owner win in that market? Who is going to support that franchise owner, which is the management piece? Who is going to support that franchise owner in being successful in the market? And based on the market, the model, and the management, what's motivating about this concept in this category at this time in that market, right? The why you, the why now. So I think that's where franchisors have to focus their efforts on educating consultants in a very specific way. It's the market, it's the model, it's the management, and the why you, why now motivation that's going to get their candidate excited about the category and my brand.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it starts from an education perspective.
I agree. I agree with you. All right. So for those that are listening, you're hearing two guys in franchise development, right? We get franchise dev, how to sell franchises. And there's franchisors that are wondering next up, okay, now how am I going to sell these? Do I do it in-house? Do I use these franchise sales organizations? You and I might have a similar perspective or totally different. I'm curious, Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, and we do both. So inside of Empower, we have an incredible alignment with one of the top franchise sales organizations out in the marketplace, Franchise Fastlane. They've done a phenomenal job in a number of our brands to help launch. I will tell you that it is a valid and successful way to launch a brand as long as a franchisor understands a couple of very key and important tenets of FSOs and outsourcing the sales process. So number one, franchise sales organizations, the ones with whom I've worked, the one thing that I've found is that it is absolutely, you're able to be aligned. FSOs want to be aligned. It's up to the franchisor to be and stay aligned with FSOs. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by saying let's be aligned? There should be a degree of expectation setting. These are the kinds of concessions I'm willing to grant. Mm-hmm. This is the kind of franchise owner or candidate rather that I want to see in the pipeline. This is when I want to engage with candidates in the process. This is how much time I want to spend with a candidate before they come into my building in a confirmation or discovery day or decision day. We call it Empower Day. There are rules of engagement that I would highly encourage a franchise owner to enter into with that FSO. Most FSOs are going to be really interested in the period, and put them kind of between the bookends, right? The period of growth that is rapid, meaningful, and significant for a brand. Most FSOs are not interested in taking on the development role of a franchisor until that franchisor has franchise owners that have been operating successfully. That is what FSOs are able to lean on to help scale and grow and award franchises very, very rapidly. You and I have talked a little bit about it. There's three legs of the stool, three main legs of the stool that you need from a development perspective. You have to have territories to award. You have to be able to point to strong unit level economics, and you have to have validation, right? You have to have franchise owners in the system that believe they're being cared for the right way and they're happy with the choice that they made. So when you think about an FSO, they utilize that strong unit level economic performance to penetrate the territories that are available. Once the territories start to get exhausted, that's typically when the FSOs fall, or that brand will fall outside of the sweet spot of the FSO. But between those bookends, the FSOs can be a great way to grow a brand, provided franchisors recognize, number one, a much more material portion of the initial franchise fee is retained by the FSO for the work that they do. Again, back to your point, if you're using franchise fees to keep the lights on, probably not the right strategy. So the material amount of that initial franchise fee is going to be kept by the FSO, number one. Number two, you got to be aligned on those rules of engagement and how we're going to work together to be able to scale. Most FSOs generate their income by selling franchises, right? Franchisors, if they're doing it the right way, they're generating their revenues and becoming positive from a cash flow perspective based on royalties. So you got to make sure that there's alignment on what the expectations are and govern the relationship accordingly.
Those are all great points, Scott. The perspective on alignment is no different whether you're employing a franchise sales organization or you are employing a remote franchise development person that's, 1,500 miles away and not in your office. Either way, they have to be in alignment, have to understand who is going to be acceptable, the culture, all those things. So if somebody is a franchisor that's thinking, all I got to do is hire an FSO and they're just going to sell franchises for me, and you think it's going to be hands off, you're making a huge mistake, because first of all, they're going to go off just what they think, as opposed to you really making them part of your family. They really are an extension of your family.
They are. You nailed it. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. You're exactly right. I think those that, when you're vetting an FSO, I think that there are lots of ways to ask questions to help understand, to help to get to that root understanding of, we're partnered up. Like, this is a partnership. You're part of the team. You're part of the family, and we've got to stay aligned. Selling a franchise is just the first step. Remember that the team that's in-house, the in-house team, whether that's a founder and a plus one, or that's a full team of individuals, that in-house team, once that franchise agreement has been signed, now has to make sure that that candidate, now franchisee, is onboarded the right way, is able to get their facility identified and under project management the right way, if there's a facility, that the business is marketed the right way, that individuals trained the right way, they open the right way, and they're coached the right way. If you don't have that team set up the right way and you add 80 franchise owners in 12 months, you're setting yourself up for some challenges, right?
Yeah.
And that becomes, that's sacrificing the long term for the short term. Because if you have attrition because you grew too fast on the front end and you couldn't support and get these franchise owners cared for and opened on the back end, that hurts the most important leg of the stool, which is validation, the way that people think about the franchisor and the support they're getting from the brand. And that has a meaningful, trickle down effect, Frank. You and I have both seen it.
Totally.
So again, staying aligned and saying, look, let's sit down and establish some goals and some expectations so that I can scale the operational side of my business while you scale the sales activity inside of my business.
Yeah.
Those have to be married up.
And that's where I think new franchisors make a mistake, where they think, if I'm in the business of franchising, that means I need to go sell franchises and expand as fast as possible. And where it is absolutely just devastating is if you say, okay, my franchise fee, let's say it's $50,000, and I'm going to bring the brokers on, $25,000 is going to the broker, $25,000 is going to the FSO, and they blow it up and they sell a whole bunch of franchises, but you can barely stay open and support them, they're going to be a statistic, right? They're not going to last. I'm bringing this up because I know there are founders out there that are listening to this that think that way, that they're saying, I'm going to just sell so many and I will start bringing in royalties, but it doesn't work that way. These franchises can't open fast enough to deliver enough return to you as the franchisor for you to be able to sustain it, right?
Right. It is. Well, I'll deal with that. That'll be a good problem to have. Like, I'll deal with that downstream.
Yes.
Right? It's like, I get that. I mean, I understand it. The difference here is that you've got individuals that are leaving careers.
Mm-hmm.
They're pulling out, leveraging their 401k. They're using debt, getting an SBA loan or angel investing to invest in your brand, right? This is a big responsibility. It's a huge responsibility. And so being planful about it, right? Using the discipline of developing a pro forma and understanding ratios to say, I'm going to build an organization such that I'm going to have one operations consultant for every 20 franchisees. That means if I sign up 40 next year, I need to hire someone else.
Right.
I need to be hiring that person in advance and getting them trained and aware of the brand and understanding of the culture and set them up for success. Like, it's about being planful. And it seems like, Frank, I think to me and to you, it seems kind of basic, but going back to some of the original discussions of that independent business owner, sometimes you're just going. Right. It's day to day, it's week to week. You're going, you're driving, and it's easy at times to not sit back and say, whoa, let's be planful about this. Let's look at the next 12 months. Let's understand our ratios. Let's look at what we're planning for development and then track along to achieving that. If things start to blow up, you can start to make decisions around, man, people are really adopting this brand. We've got a lot of franchise candidate interest. What does that mean for us? Does it mean that we continue to scale? And that means I've got to go higher to stay in ratio, and I've got to get a bigger office building, and I've got to think about more people to run marketing for more franchise owners. Remember, ratios are not just tied to operations consultants in the field. They also tie to the marketing resources you need, the onboarding resources you need, the training resources you need. So again, being planful here is just incredibly important as folks start thinking about rapid growth. And that's something FSOs do bring to the table, is rapid growth, but you got to be ready for it.
Yeah, there's an expectation on their side from the take you on. Okay, we're now at a great fork in the road. So now you have a choice, Mr. Founder or Mrs. Founder. What would you like to do? Would you like to continue to bootstrap your franchise and keep going? Or do you want to take in outside capital or maybe become part of a platform? So I thought this is a great opportunity, since the two of us come from the two different ways of doing it. There's no wrong way. I want to hear about your side of the business, though, being part of a platform. Share the obvious, but I mean, share what are the upsides and who is the right kind of founder that fits in a platform. And I want to know who doesn't fit.
Yeah, well, I think let's just start. Gosh, we could go on for a day. I'm telling you, but so I'll tell you from my view, and then how I think about it from a founder's view, and you've been through it from a founder's view, and from our perspective, the first thing that I think about is Empower's strategy. Right, we have a strategy to bring to market differentiated, category leading concepts that bring real value to the consumer, incredible opportunity for the franchise owner, and allow for the whole of Empower to be successful, and more importantly, to be in a position where we can be better at what we do, right? That's one of the benefits that comes with scale. We're not the first ones to have a portfolio organization in franchising. We will definitely not be the last. I think about the organization itself and who makes up the leadership here at Empower. Our CEO, Scott Sutton, is a brand founder, but before he was a brand founder, he was a franchise owner. Came out of college, got into the food space, was a franchise owner, bridged into franchise ownership in the services space, sold that franchise, became an operations consultant, became a brand leader. Now he's the CEO. We've incubated and launched 7 different brands. We have 4 people on our leadership team that were former franchisees. We've got an institutional amount of knowledge related to franchising, both at the franchisee level and at the incubation and launch level. right? So from our perspective, we are looking for founders of companies that are differentiated and leaders in their category that are open to, interested in, and see the value in anchoring up with an organization that's got institutional knowledge on how to grow and scale. And that's a long way of saying, if you want an operating strategic partnership with a company that's been there and done that, we're a great fit. And we look for that. If you don't want that, if you just want a financial partner, if you want to kind of do things your own way and not lean into what are some of the established best practices and franchise growth, probably not the right fit for us, or for you. So that's what Empower is looking for in companies and in concepts that we believe are going to be meaningful for the consumer and franchisee over time. I think at the company founder level, first things first, I want to know that the company that I'm a part of, that my brand is going to be cared for through, is an organization that has real experience growing and growing the right way. Again, there are a lot of folks that are out there. Big thing that, and you know this, Frank, you've been through it, right? The big thing that you have to let go of is substantial control over that strategy, right? Not so much the vision, but the strategy and the decision making. And that's why it's so important to be aligned from a cultural perspective and a business perspective. But you've been there from a founder's perspective. I'm really curious, like your future self, which is today's Frank.
Yeah.
What would Frank say to younger Frank about, all right, here's some things to think about as you start talking to private equity or other investment options out in the market?
The youngest me starting out thought nobody could do it like me, right? And probably control over the brand was most important. 55-year-old me realizes it takes a village to truly build something incredible. And I had my own team. I could have taken shortcuts along the way by being in alignment with a platform. It would have been interesting, though, depending on how old I was, to look at it. Maybe 35-year-old me would have been like, you know what? Having control over my brand was most important. At that age, I thought I was going to do it for life. I really did. There's no way about it. I thought it was my purpose. And then as I got older and I saw how hard it is to be successful in franchising and bringing on people, somebody who was right for my company, like part of the management team, when we were 15 franchises strong, Scott, was not the right person, let's say in marketing, when we were 100 franchises strong. It's harder for me to be able to adapt and to be able to change. Whereas if I'm part of a platform, it's in basically the platform's hands to have the right team and to mix and match, right?
You're so right. I think, there's an evolution here, right? And brands evolve, companies evolve, people evolve. But part of that is to say, what are the needs of the organization today? What are the needs going to be of the organization 5 years from now, or when I reach my 50th franchise owner or 100th franchise owner, when I need to level up the tech stack to be more tech forward because that's where the consumer is going, or that's where the competition is going, or that's where I want to go because we're going to be incredibly differentiated.
Yeah.
So that evolution obviously means more investment, better skilled leaders and employees to be able to drive that kind of differentiation. That evolution is key.
It's very stressful to bootstrap it and do it on your own. And we talked about this in New Orleans. I think I mentioned this in the group. In 2003, it was a little different back then. And I'm not sure if I had to start all over again in 2023, if I would have done it the same way. Number one, going back to the beginning of the show, I definitely would have kept and probably added a few more company-owned locations just for cash flow purposes, for starters. Probably would have looked to develop the right people ahead of time, or got ahead of it in hiring people that had franchise experience, which we didn't have. None of us had franchise experience until I realized about 5 years in, like, we need people with franchise experience, right? So being part of the platform, also this whole thing of the platform has really emerged in the past few years. Yes, it's been around for a long time, but it's front and center now in franchising, and not everybody's doing it right. I think, and I would love to talk more here about Empower Brands, because you are a little bit different. There are platforms out there or portfolio companies that are strictly PE owned, it's money people. They will readily admit, we don't know anything about franchising, but we're the money guys, and we are creating this platform with a brand new name, and we're going to put people in place. And they might be just money people, again, who know nothing about franchising. And they're not the right people to align yourself with. Otherwise, you can get incredibly frustrated. Somebody like Empower Brands, would you share the 11 brands that you guys have and sort of the objective overall for Empower?
Yeah, great question. And so Empower Brands, we've got 11 in the portfolio, 11 brands. 8 of those brands sit inside of the residential services space, the home services space. 3 of the brands are on the commercial side. And Empower is the name that really came from all the cultural work that we did to define who are we, what is our culture, what's our vision, what's our mission. But that exercise was born out of 2 businesses coming together, Lynx Franchising and Outdoor Living Brands. Again, Outdoor Living Brands was just that. It was the residential services side of the house. Lynx Franchising was the commercial side of the house. So Intelligent Office, Jan Pro, and First Team are the 3 brands that sit inside of the organization on the commercial side of the business. Archidec Outdoor Living, Bubble Roofing, Canopy Lawn Care, Conserva Irrigation, Koala Insulation, Outdoor Lighting Perspectives, Wallaby Windows, and Superior Fence and Rail are the 8 brands that sit inside of the residential side of the house. Part of the strategy as these businesses came together, Frank, was to be diversified, to have the ability to do 2 things, to have commercial clientele, to have residential clientele, and then have an opportunity to utilize some of those commercial relationships across the residential brands that could have the opportunity to scale in the commercial side of the business. And we all know that whether you're dealing with a B2B scenario or a B2C scenario, you're dealing with people. So those companies that utilize JanPro's services, those services are purchased by people, and those people own homes or they reside in homes. And so there is a need for other services. So that's the way that the company came about, foundationally associated with brands that are deemed to be market leading and premium in each category. It's been an evolution. We're not done yet, right? Mm-hmm. We continue to strive to be more relevant in each brand that we have today, but to also continue to build out a suite of brands that are differentiated and category leading.
Cool. Scott, if I was a founder and considering coming into Empower, what does my role look like?
Yeah, great question. And so just having this conversation with Mr. Hunt Davis. Hunt is the founder of Canopy Lawn Care. And if you think about the way that Empower is structured, we have a shared services model. And so our shared services organization, which is everything from IT to accounting and finance to development to HR to marketing, all of the functions that we develop at the Empower level to support the brands and franchise owners at the brand level, that shared services function is in place to do one thing, right? And that is to support each brand. But within each brand, there's a president, there's a director of operations, and there are operational consultants that are charged with helping, supporting, mentoring each franchise owner. So Hunt Davis is a great example. He is the president of Canopy Lawn Care. He sets the strategy. He pulls from the shared services organization at Empower and holds that organization accountable to deliver the kinds of support, the kinds of innovation and needs that have to be met by him to deliver world-class support to franchise owners and winning customers. That's the way the organization is set up from a shared services perspective. But Hunt coming in as the founder of Canopy Lawn Care, he knew there was no way that he would be able to build an organization from a tech, marketing, onboarding, training perspective that had the experience that Empower had in the shared services team. So he's able to pull from that, but he's also the leader of the brand. He's the president of the brand and the individual that franchisees first turn to understand the strategy and how they're going to win.
That makes perfect sense for me as a founder to consider how I'm going to grow this thing. Forget, being, my baby and everything. I think as you mature and grow, you realize you got to put that aside. Like it's bigger than you, and like I said earlier, it takes a village to grow this. Franchising is so hard, and you don't have the resources as an individual founder, for the most part, to be able to keep up with the technology stack, like you said, or the support as support changes and evolves and grows. At the heart of the matter, I'm sure there's potential franchisees when they're meeting with a particular brand, when they're meeting or hearing from the brand president, they can feel the heart and soul is not lost, right? That's what the founder's providing. It's still, you can feel the soul of the company.
It's so interesting because I think about Scott Marr, who's the founder of Koala Insulation and Wallaby Windows. He is a brand builder. His alignment with the way that our leadership has built prior brands, it's hand in glove, right? There's just this alignment on bringing to market innovation and new products, new categories, new brands that are going to help franchisees be successful. David Baton, I love this story, Frank. David Baton, who founded Bumble Roofing, he's now the president of Bumble Roofing. I'll never forget meeting him for the first time. And I asked that question, young guy, successful guy. He's been out there just grinding and grit and making things happen in the marketplace. And I asked him, like, what's your goal? Ultimately, what is the goal for Bumble? He didn't hesitate. He said, my goal for Bumble is I want Bumble Roofing to be a household name in the category. I want them to be a household name. And he said, the only and best way that I can make that happen is by aligning myself with a leader in the space. And so I sat back and went, okay, right, here is an individual that has built something special and differentiated and is humble enough to seek the support, the alignment, the partnership with another organization to make that brand that he created a household name. And he's going to achieve that, Frank. And he's going to be sitting back someday very soon going, I started that brand.
Right.
I started that brand and made the right decision to partner in a way that was going to help me scale and become a household name. It's a really cool thing.
It's a great way of looking at it. I think it's the same as whether you decide to go with the platform or eventually decide to exit your company. I look at it as your baby grew up, it got married, it had kids of its own. Now you're the grandparent. You get to spend time with the kid and then hand it back.
That's exactly right. That's perfect, right? You can go check in and do your thing, right?
Check in when the husband's going, oh, that sucks for you. Too bad. I don't have to deal with that anymore. I mean, life in franchising is not always unicorns and rainbows, right? It's
tough. I mean, at the end of the day, right? We talk about the yins and the yangs.
Yeah.
And talk about a football player. If you're speedy and you're small and,
right.
and you're quick, somebody puts a paw on you, you're probably going to go down. But if you're huge and you can tackle well and you're 300 pounds, you're not running a 4-second 40-yard dash. So, things that are positive can also be a challenge. But at the end of the day, we know we have brands where our successful franchise owners are they're type A, they're hard chargers. They go. They are the kind of people that are going to build the brand the right way and scale it in an effective way. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, you got to stay aligned. And sometimes that means having those brutal facts conversations, the hard discussions about overall strategy and direction and initiative and passion. It's a hard business at times, Frank, but anything worthwhile is difficult at times. And as long as you understand that and you come in with eyes wide open, I think everybody understands that.
Hey, Scott, if someone was interested in being a franchisee of one of your brands, or maybe want to get more information on becoming part of Empower Brands, how can they get a hold of you guys?
Yeah. And first things first. So would love for folks to check out empowerfranchising.com. That is our franchising website. It gives everyone a rundown of all of the brands in all the categories we serve. And of course, beyond that, would love to have a conversation with anyone, Frank, that's interested in learning more about our brands. We've got world-class developers that represent each of our brands, including Franchise Fastlane, who is representing a number of our brands in the marketplace as well. So check out our website, reach out to me. I'd love to have an opportunity to talk to folks about the great brands and things that are going on at Empower.
Cool. All right. Last thing, I always finish with a thing called the tip jar. And this has been like full of tips. You've stuffed the tip jar with so much great info. But if I was a new franchisor, what would you tell me? What's a big piece of advice you'd give me before I go into this?
Yeah. Number one, do not be afraid to network. All kinds of franchising events, a great trade association, trade group, the International Franchise Association. And Frank, you are living proof. Franchise founders, those that have forged this path ahead of those that are thinking of forging this path. Those that have forged the path are willing, are able, and eager to share their experiences, what worked, what to look out for. So don't be shy. Get yourself involved in the industry, network with folks that have founded and started brands, and don't be afraid to use those guidance nuggets, the best practices in building out the way that you think about going to market. I'm a firm believer, Frank, that very few problems in business are unsolved. Most are solved. The trick is finding the solution. And the franchising sector is to me just an incredible place to be, because founders, Frank, people like you are sharing such incredible information about how to think about things, what to do, and there's great value in that. So get to networking now.
Awesome. Scott, thank you so much. I'm so glad that our paths crossed through the IFA, that we got a chance to meet for that first time at Emerging. Thanks so much for being on the show. I thought this was a fantastic episode. I can't wait to get this out to everybody. I hope to see you again.
Frank, thank you so much, man. This was a blast. Always love having our conversations. Let's get together soon. If
Please.
We don't do that between now and the end of the month, happy holidays to you and your family, and all of your listeners, people that are participating. This has just been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.